Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you all had a nice coffee and there was plenty of conversations going on, plenty of discussions. We're just setting up here on stage, so while they're setting up, I have a little story to tell you about what Irish people do best in bars. What do you think that Irish people are famous for in bars? No, not that. It's singing. Irish people have this great tradition of singing in bars, having a sing-song. Of course, there's a bit of drinking as well, but that's neither here nor there. So I want to tell you a story, because we were talking earlier about one person's cost is another person's opportunities and different meanings for words. So let me tell you a little story that came to my mind about in Dublin. We were there one time in a bar, and it was the week after Christmas. So we were all singing around about 20 of us around 4 or 5 tables, singing songs, having a beer, a couple of guitars, a couple of fiddles, and an Irish handheld drum that you play with a stick called a bodhrán. And somebody decides it's Christmas, so we sing some Christmas songs. So we did the Fairy Tale of New York and a couple of more songs. And then some guy gets a bright idea. Let's sing a hymn. This is Holy Catholic Ireland. We'll suspend our cynicism for just a few minutes and we'll sing a hymn. Anyone know any hymns? Silence. Jerry, do you know any hymns? No. Martina, do you know any hymns? No. Nobody put their hand up. So behind the bar was the barman, Larry. And Larry's a famous wit. But he's also a very good singer and knows any song you want to mention. So, of course, the guy, not to be deterred, says, Larry, do you know any hymns? Larry, quick as a wink, says, I know loads of hymns. And he points out to the crowd, I know him over there, I know him over there, I know him over there. That's how language can be twisted. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's time to get back down to business. We're back to our next plenary panel, and I'm delighted to have as our chairperson Dr. Victor Santiago Pineda, who's the founder and president of Pineda Foundation and World Enabled. And Francesca is going to give us a few bio notes on Dr. Pineda.
Thank you, Jerry. Dr. Pineda is the president and founder of the Pineda Foundation and World Enabled, an adjunct professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of California at Berkeley. He's a leading global expert on disability rights, policy, planning, and design, and has worked closely with the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the World Bank, United Nations, UNESCO, UNICEF, and cabinet-level officials of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Venezuela, and Serbia, among others, and developed policies and programs that include persons with disabilities and as equal stakeholders in development. He's the recipient of numerous awards and holds a Ph.D. from the Laskin School for Public Affairs at the University of California at Los Angeles, has Masters in City and Regional Planning, and BA in Political Economy and BS in Business Administration from the University of California at Berkeley. He's currently leading a global discussion on inclusion and equity in smart cities. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you all for being here today. I mean, it's exciting to see a room full of people that have made my life better. And we're making each other's lives better, so give yourselves a round of applause at each other. Today's conversation really is about looking forward to the future. And the best way to introduce this is to show you a short video on the vision and the possibilities of smart cities. So let's cue that up and then introduce our distinguished panel.
Swirling white dots against black, they merge to form a scintillating orb that glows bright blue, then explodes, leaving a white dot within a sphere. Solitary strands link the dots into a long, curved line stretching to a network of strands.
Titles. In the beginning, we had the network. We saw a new communication technology, a new way to bring people together.
In color film, a gold rectangular box framed in black is inserted in a machine. Thick cables extend from the sides. People in a large room are dwarfed by bulky gray box-like contraptions and a massive console.
Back then, as we created this technology, we saw a glimpse of the future that this would create, but no one really knew.
The connective dot strands stretch between buildings in a metropolis, above a suspension bridge and on toward a bright sun on the horizon.
Today is that future. Internet traffic has grown exponentially since the 60s. It will reach a zettabyte by 2016. Our mobile devices are more powerful than the supercomputers we used 20 years ago. Mobile data traffic is growing exponentially, doubling every year. And now, with the cloud, we're connecting the physical world and the internet.
A tiny rectangular computer sensor is perched on a fingertip.
Using microsensors and the network, we're making everyday objects intelligent.
A spinning globe of interconnecting white strands.
Welcome to the Internet of Everything.
A tall tree with thick bark and leafy branches is encircled by numbers and formulas.
A tree in Brussels provides scientific data to 4,000 Twitter followers.
A skateboard park of curves and plateaus. Data overlays a board's wheels and platform.
By 2020, 50 billion things will be connected to the network.
From above, the tall rectangular UN building.
In May 2011, the UN declared the Internet a fundamental human right. We live in a world we barely imagined 20 years ago, and this is just the beginning.
From above the island of Manhattan at sunset, streets brightly lit and skyscrapers soaring.
Here's to the next 20 years. Here's to the network.
Spanning the spire of the Empire State Building, the words,
Here's to humanity.
White strands merge to form a series of vertical lines above the words,
Cisco. Tomorrow starts here. Audio description written and voiced by Joel Snyder, Audio Description Associates with Tricia McCauley. Production by Dominion Post.
Thank you. Today's panel really brings together the leading figures in smart cities. It's a great honor to welcome Matt Caywood, CEO of TransitScreen. Now, Matt loves public transportation and he loves data, so much so that he created the first web planner for the London Tube in 1997. And he went on to continue that leadership and develop a mobility lab for transit tech, and now is the CEO of TransitScreen. So we're going to welcome Matt here to talk about data and transportation. John Combs is a senior manager of accessibility at Cisco and bringing 30 years of experience in telephony, technology, global product compliance, but really thinking a lot about the issues of privacy as well as emergency services. We have Malcom, Strategic Partnerships Manager at Uber, really helping to form partnerships with civil society and thinking a lot about Uber as a platform for delivery of mobility, of a range of mobility solutions. Dan Norman, Head of Strategic Engagement at GSMA, really brings together a global perspective on the mobile technology industry and telecommunication industry, 35 years in the field, really looking now at wireless startups, restructuring, mergers, and how all these things come together. He's a smart guy and holds 7 patents in the industry. Bill Oates, next to me, really brings the experience on the ground, being the Chief Information Officer of both the City of Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He's a lawyer by training, but also is looking at leading the discussion in the area of education and is now at the Perkins Institute. So let's give everybody a warm welcome and get this started. I'm going to start off with Bill. What are smart cities? And specifically, what did you do as the Chief Information Officer to make Boston smarter than it already was?
Well, Boston was pretty smart to start with, which is always good. But I had been in the private sector for 20 plus years and landed in government just about 10 years ago now. And I remembered sitting at home one day after I had taken over the role of Chief Information Officer at the city, and it was really the first time the city had an IT person reporting directly to the mayor that was kind of empowered to figure out how technology could help the city. And I remember watching an ad on TV, and it was the first ad I saw for IBM Smarter Cities. And it was really flashy and interesting, but it was focused on Singapore. So the next day, I called IBM to say, well, let's talk about Boston. You know, why not take some of this thought leadership and start bringing it in to an organization like ours? Because I felt Boston had the right mix. We had a very empowered mayor. The geography of Boston isn't as complicated as New York and LA and Chicago, and that we had a great ecosystem of academia and others that could help us do that. So we started that conversation right away. And I learned very quickly that these things are difficult in organizations like city government. Government is very fragmented. We talk about things like data security. I remember when folks used to say to me, aren't you worried about your data? And my answer used to be, I'm the CIO of the city. I can't find my data. I don't know how a hacker could. You know, and that was to give you an idea of just how distributed and how fragmented government was. But we did spend a good amount of time thinking about the technology opportunities that would help us make Boston a smarter city. And the basis of that was how could we engage better with our citizenry? We felt that the smart city of the future was the most engaged city. So we started building tools that allowed us to leverage these new technologies and truly connect with the citizens and gather the data from those connections to help make us better at serving the city. And as I came to Perkins for the last year, you know, one of the things that was clear is that smart cities are great, and smart cities means connected, engaged cities, but you really need to engage everybody, and everybody means everybody. So the thought process around how do we make this emerging technology not only effective to help run the city, but also make it open, accessible, and equitable for everybody was a real challenge. I look back and I see what Boston has become a very smart city. There's a long way to go, but because what we find, and I found it in the city and in the state, is again, these organizations are complicated. Sometimes it's hard to get traction. The budgets are challenges and things like that. But it was a commitment to really think about engaging citizens more effectively and engaging all citizens effectively that I think got us off on the right foot.
So when we think about these partnerships across the city, we're also dealing with a variety of silos of data and information. A lot of those are really bridged through wireless technologies. So Dan, could you talk to me a little bit about what GSMA is doing and thinking about, specifically in terms of the roles that telecommunications plays and the kind of partnerships that need to be formed to create a truly integrated smart network?
Yes, Victor, I'd be happy to. First, a little bit about the GSMA. We are a membership association, the global membership association for wireless operators. We have almost 850 members around the world, 12 offices, about 300 members of the ecosystem who are not mobile network operators. There are really three areas where we're focused in smart cities right now on behalf of our operators, all 850 of them. They are, number one, making sure that cities understand that the networks, AT&T, Verizon, China Mobile, China Telecom, Telefonica, et cetera, I'll save you from listing all 850 of them, are the best partner, the partner of choice for a city to work with, a good place to start. Who doesn't have a wireless phone these days? There are almost 8 billion of them on the face of the earth today, and a number of machine-to-machine IoT devices all around the world. The second area that we're concerned about is making sure that our operators' networks are conditioned and ready to handle all the traffic that's associated with the Internet of Things. And again, we represent the interest of our operators, with regulators, with government entities, with manufacturers and the broader ecosystem. So working to define what that network needs to look like in a smart cities environment is extremely important. And then the third area is that of security, data security, which takes on really two levels. The first level is just basic fundamentals within a network. For example, to give you an example, in Mumbai, a number of the school buses in Mumbai are connected to the Internet of Things. And as long as these school buses are out and around the city, it's not much of a problem. But the minute those school buses all return to the schoolyard, they continue to transmit data. But now they're transmitting data all from one small area of the city and literally congesting the network, clogging the network. And so we work with operators, we work with manufacturers, we work with software designers to help them understand that simple things like when the school buses come back to a central area, maybe they stop transmitting data routinely, and you look at a better way to transmit that data to keep from clogging the network. It's kind of like Super Bowl Sunday when the commercial comes on and everyone runs to the bathroom. Something bad's going to happen. The other area that we're concerned about is that of hacking. There was an article in the Washington Post recently. It said the Internet of Things will kill you. And it talked about hackers getting into insulin pumps and hackers getting into pacemakers and various things like that. The operators that we represent, we find that an awful lot of the Internet of Things services share in common a lot of the services and devices when they're built that the telecommunications network has and has had along with computing and IT. And so we find that there's a lot that we can do in terms of helping the broader ecosystem learn a bit about data security. And so we're beginning to develop a website to pass along a number of security guidelines on what some of the lessons that have been learned by the operators today.
John, let me ask you, how is it that Cisco is really thinking about people with disabilities? Because, Dan talked about the systems and the networks, but hasn't really addressed, the end user. How are you guys thinking about it? Because you both work on the back end with a large infrastructure and data interconnecting the data sets with cities and with the mobile providers, but you also had some innovative examples with the end users. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Cisco is mostly the Internet's plumbers. We make the back office hardware, routing, switching, data center infrastructure. So the Internet of Things, we don't really make the things at the endpoints. But we have sponsored a contest in Cisco, France a couple of years ago that specifically was university-level students in engineering schools to come up with ideas for the Internet of Things. There was over 60 proposals. The one that won was pretty interesting because they took an everyday object that you see all the time, a blind man's white cane, which is a fairly dumb object, and they made it electronic and put quite a bit of interface into it, sonar, so instead of just being able to tap what they're immediately beside, they get a sphere of space around them. It's also internet connected. It has Bluetooth, and you can wear an earbud. It will help guide you by using Google Maps, so you can find places around the city. And if another aspect of smart cities is beacons. If businesses put beacons in that would say, hey, this is a pizza parlor or whatever, the cane would pick that up and feed it to the Bluetooth earpiece. So the students took their prize money, and when they graduated from university in late 2014, they started a startup in France. They should have this cane on the market somewhere around the beginning of 2017, unfortunately only in France the first year. But you were mentioning security. Whether or not the Internet of Things reaches what we'd all like to see is dependent on whether or not we can solve the security issues. A big part of a smart city is big data. There's all kinds of data being gathered, whether it's location of vehicles or even people. And you're going to have startups come along and say, if you'll just give me access to this specific amount of your data, I could do a new business or I could do this. And then you're going to run into issues, not only is the data secure from hackers, but political issues. If the city owns the data, will they release it for certain types of applications? I see that still evolving sort of in the political arena. As a company, Cisco is trying to advance the security of the internet because you may know we're famous for buying companies. We've bought 193 companies as of last week. And a lot of the last couple of years, a lot of the acquisitions have been security companies like Talos. So we are working behind the scenes on the security aspect.
Matthew, John talked about data. You love data. How is it simply the thing to say that smart cities are data-rich cities? Is data what makes cities smart, or is it something else?
That's a great question, Victor, and I think I'd echo Bill's thoughts that it's not the data that matters, it's the information, and it's getting the information to people. So smart cities are cities that empower their citizens, regardless of who they are, with the data and the information that they need to make smarter decisions, whether that's a more efficient decision or a more sustainable decision or any other number of things you can optimize for. That's what makes a smart city. Just to give a little bit of big picture, smart cities globally have been estimated at a $1.4 trillion market, and it's one that, similar to the telecommunications market with a lot of overlap. Just as one small part of this that's particularly relevant to us at TransitScreen, because we're in the business of getting people information about public transportation on time, McKinsey report estimated that $60 billion globally is wasted from people waiting for public transportation, either waiting to catch it or waiting to transfer from one to the other. And so if we could just find a way to use the Internet of Things to get the information from the buses to the network, to the public signage, to the mobile device, then you can actually make that easier and solve the problem that people are having in terms of delay, and then also save all of that money globally.
Why do we all get a rush when we get to the bus? And we have 2 minutes left and we just catched it, I love feeling empowered with that data because I know that I don't have to waste my time. But more than that, I think for somebody like me that has significant disabilities, there's a lot of risks. Going out, being exposed to the elements, the rain, whatever, and so crossing the street at a busy intersection, trying to think about connections, trying to think about, will I find an accessible restroom? There's just so much that goes into just planning a trip, that I have to calculate and incorporate a whole other range of risks, right? And that elevates the transaction cost of me going to work or going to school or getting the things done. I want a service that can lower that transaction cost. And part of that is the data. But yet there are new services like Uber, Malcom, that are really empowering people with safety. They know their driver. They know how to get, where to pick up. They can rate the drivers. Even the riders can be rated. And I know that you've done great work with the community for people that are hard of hearing and visually impaired. There's still work to do on improving the app for riders with hearing impairments in terms of getting a call from the driver once they're picking you up. But my question is, when will I be able to ride in an autonomous, wheelchair-accessible Uber taxi? That's what I want to know.
Well, thank you, Victor, for your question. I don't know the answer to the autonomous part, but I can tell you a little bit more about the work that we're doing to make sure that the vehicles on our platform are accessible for people in powered wheelchairs. So just for perspective, right now, we're operating in about 15 different cities around the world where you can call a wheelchair-accessible vehicle in some fashion on the Uber app. There are 12 cities in the United States and 3 internationally. We're in Sydney, we're in Toronto, and we're in London. Part of the issue that we have as a company is that our drivers all own their own vehicles. And so every driver is choosing to drive as often as he or she wants, wherever he or she wants. And so our goal and our challenge, and quite frankly our opportunity, is to figure out how to incentivize drivers who have wheelchair accessible vehicles to get on the road, and to make sure that we're incentivizing it enough that there's always an opportunity to call a wheelchair accessible vehicle whenever you need it. One of the great things about Uber, and one of the reasons that I think we've been able to grow and be so successful so quickly, is in most places where Uber operates, you can get a ride in just a couple minutes, and we want to make sure that that's the case for wheelchair accessible vehicles as well. Another one of the models we're looking at is around working with taxi organizations that have wheelchair accessible vehicles. So for example, in Washington, D.C. right now, you can actually call a wheelchair accessible taxi through the Uber app, and it can come pick you up in a number of minutes. Obviously, there are some issues with, combining the taxi service with the Uber service, and we're certainly very cognizant of quality issues and reliability and wait times, but that's one of the models we're exploring. But I think the model that is most promising, and the one that I think is going to have the greatest opportunity to scale, is working with commercial partners. So, as I mentioned, that reliability is a really important thing. So what if we could find an organization that, for some reason, maybe they've worked with paratransit in the past, whatever the case may be, has excess supply of wheelchair accessible vehicles. And so we're actually about to launch a really unique pilot in Chicago, where we're working with an organization that has thousands of wheelchair accessible vehicles. And we're going to develop a partnership with them. They're going to, in turn, pay employees to drive around the city at all times, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, such that at any point you can pull up the app, call a wheelchair accessible vehicle, and it'll come pick you up. Obviously, one of the things that that's really important to us in that respect is making sure that we're working with partners who are going to be reliable, who are going to hire employees to drive that meet the same standards of the drivers that we have on our platform for the rest of our products. And one of the things that I'm looking to everyone in this room for is to help us find those partners. Because I think when we identify those partners, that's when we're really going to be able to scale our wheelchair accessible options all across the cities in which we operate. We know we haven't done as much on the wheelchair accessible vehicle front as we should, but one of the things that's been really heartening to me is Uber is here to stay. We're in 400 cities, 70 countries. It's in many ways, I think, in complement with other forms of transportation, the future of how we're going to get around, and we need to get this right. It's too important. It's too much of an opportunity from a business, and quite frankly, it's just the right thing to do. So I think in the next couple of months, you'll see some really interesting and innovative ideas that we have around building out our wheelchair accessible vehicle fleet.
So, go ahead, Malcom. When you say get this right, what does it mean to get it right for people with disabilities? Because I want to open this up to anybody. What does it mean to get smart cities right for older persons, or get smart cities right for persons with disabilities? Yeah.
I'll just jump in with my pet peeve. And my pet peeve has to do with applications. There are thousands of very useful applications that are under development, and thousands of very useful applications that are out there right now. But there are a lot of useless applications. And there are applications just looking for some kind of a use. And I'll give you a good example. And I'm sorry we don't have any developers on the panel, or I'd take a shot at them. I just bought a brand new washing machine. My 11-year washing machine broke after 11 years, and bought a new one. And I can actually start it with my smartphone. Now that's kind of interesting to me, because I go load my clothes into my washer. I pour the laundry detergent into my washer. I select the cycle and the spin and the length of time and how dirty or clean the clothes are. And then I've got to stop, or I can stop and go find my phone, fish it out of my pocket, open it up, go to the app, flip through the app, and then press the start button. And the entire time I'm doing that, the start button on the washer is right there looking at me. And so I'm absolutely positive that the same person that designed that application also designed the one that tells me that I can close that big white garage door that I'm looking at when I back out every morning with my smartphone. And the same guy that designed the one that tells me at work, I get an alert that tells me that the filter on my refrigerator needs to be changed. It's not like I can't see that when I go back to the refrigerator and it tells me on the face of the refrigerator, change the filter. So my whole point is there are an awful lot of useless applications looking for for some kind of a use in the industry. And I hear a lot of them being with the GSMA. So my pet peeve is that we need to focus on applications that are real, applications that solve problems. Let's not fill the network up with being able to start your, and I don't know why I would want to start my washer from work. If I got it already and it's all loaded in, why would I want to then go to work? So let's focus on useful applications and focus on getting it right. That's what I think
getting it right is being targeted, not clogging your network and your provider's networks with useless data. Anybody else on getting it right?
Yeah, I think, having been involved in smart cities conversations in my government roles, one of the things I've learned, particularly over the last year, is that we really need to amplify the needs of people with disabilities because smart city progress is difficult by itself. But I think organizations like this, as Malcolm said, partnerships are really important because there are real opportunities. There are opportunities to develop applications and services and technologies that really do help. And it's fortunate for me because I sit at the Perkins School for the Blind, which got a great shout out from Senator Markey earlier today. But we get to talk to people about what are those challenges and where could we use technology to actually help. And I think the area of transportation is a great one. We're currently working on an app that, helps people that are blind or visually impaired, find the bus stop, right? In Massachusetts, we have a lot of surface buses going around and no standards as to what those bus stop poles look like or where they might be. GPS can get you kind of close, but it can't get you close enough to know exactly where should I be standing. And so we're developing an app, and we're using, some crowdsourcing clues, from both visually impaired folks and sighted folks to help contribute to that person of how do I find the actual place to stop. Then it's going to get supplemented by things like beacons, right? Because now the beacon will be able to tell us exactly, through haptic vibration on my phone or maybe through an audio cue, here's where you should be standing. The next piece is the data. So the data that you can get out of this infrastructure that you build, well, right now, most of the public transportation companies, particularly with surface buses, they don't know where people are getting on or where they're getting off. These beacons can now give you data and give you insights. Maybe I know that I have folks with disabilities that are particularly using buses in these areas, and now I can work on crosswalk safety in those areas because that's what we need to do, because those things are so tightly connected. So we see huge opportunity in extending that infrastructure for a community that really we want to reduce that friction to transit. I'm going for a job interview or whatever I might be doing, or maybe I just want to go tour the city of Boston for pleasure. We want everybody to be able to do that. And there's economics around it, too. If we can make that public fixed-route transit smoother, then less folks will need the paratransit requirements and things like that. So there's economics around this that can work as well. But we believe this is what gets you to truly be a smart city or a smart region, and we think we just need to continue to amplify with great partners the importance of this and the fact that these apps and these challenges can be overcome with the technology that we have in front of us today.
Well, let me jump in with this and then get back to the other comments. You talked about paratransit, and we see a major disinvestment in public services and a major erosion of public infrastructure. Is part of getting it right in smart cities is recognizing how the disinvestment in public services kind of raises an opportunity to kind of bridge some of these shortcomings?
100%.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one of the quotes that we use a lot at TransitScreen is the mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa, said, "The sign of an advanced society is not where the poor drive cars, but where the rich ride transit." And that's because you're providing a public good that's a high-quality service, and it meets the standard that anyone, even discretionary riders, can use. And the same thing is true, obviously for people who have disabilities. It's not the one where they're all having to ride paratransit. It's where everyone can ride transit and everyone can get around in sort of the first-class accommodation. And so along those lines. I think that's what really getting it right means, is finding ways to make that investment, but then also being smart about the investment that you make. Because one other thing that people have found in public transportation that's really interesting is that it costs a ton of money to operate buses, and so the cost of increasing service means you have to buy more vehicles, more drivers, everything, more gasoline, but it's been studied, and people would rather have real-time information about when the buses are arriving than have more buses running on the route. So if they have that information, which is way cheaper to provide, then that's a very sound public investment in something that will make the service better for people, that people like, and it also provides them with the information that they need to have a safe and reliable trip. That's a real smart city application.
So then the data is more valuable than the frequency.
In some cases, obviously not, if you've got a bus that's running every hour, but we're talking about, 10, 15 minutes, people would rather have the data.
Well, I think Matt actually makes a really good point around the cost of infrastructure, and I think this is sort of at the core of why Uber has been able to grow and grow as quickly as it has. And, I saw this firsthand living not too long ago in San Francisco, and I think it's also interesting that Uber was born in San Francisco, and that's in part because of the entrepreneurial spirit of the valley and the progress and the innovation that takes place there. But I think San Francisco is actually a really good example of a city that has significantly underinvested in infrastructure for a really long time. And so obviously there's this robust narrative going on there about how the tech industry is changing the culture of the city. It's among the most, if not the most expensive housing market in the country. And I think a lot of that has to do not just with the recent tech boom and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Yahoos and the Microsofts of the world, but with a generations-long lack of investment in public infrastructure. And specifically that's related to housing and transportation. And what happens is these tech people come into the city, they drive up prices. People who have lived there for a long time, people who are poor oftentimes, people with disabilities, are priced out of the city. And in the absence of this significant investment in public infrastructure, public transportation, that means if they had a job, have a much more difficult time getting access to that job. If they don't have access to the car, which is increasingly the case for folks in the disability community, for folks who just don't have a lot of money, it makes it much harder for them to get back into that city center. And as Matt said, public infrastructure investment costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of political will, and it's basically a politician saying to his constituents, I'm going to raise your taxes. It's going to disrupt the city in the short term, but you have to trust me that this is going to have a long-term benefit. And related to the quote you made from the mayor of Bogota, this is probably disproportionately going to impact people who don't have a strong political voice. And so that vacuum was the reason an entity like Uber could come onto the scene and grow so quickly. The question for us was, well, what if we could use the existing infrastructure, roads, highways, bridges? What if we could use that existing infrastructure on which to build a transportation platform? And the thing I would say at this point is, this is not why Uber started. Uber started because there was a guy and his friend who didn't like taxis in San Francisco because they're unreliable. He has a smartphone. He said, what if we could combine the two? But what we've seen as we've scaled is we have this amazing opportunity to serve the needs of people who have, for generations, been terribly underserved by transportation. And I'm glad, Victor, you brought up paratransit, because one of the things that we would love to do is engage more significantly with paratransit organizations to figure out how we can use our technology to work with the vehicles they have, the drivers they have, the know-how they have to work with folks in the disability community to make their efforts more reliable and more affordable. And so we're hopeful to be able to do that in the coming months as well.
Any other comments on partnerships or getting it right?
I can tie two or three of these themes together. First of all, I ride the light rail to work in Silicon Valley, and one of the panelists mentioned rating the drivers on, on-time performance. That has unintended consequences. Sometimes if the driver's running late, they turn off the GPS so the train doesn't show on my map on my phone anymore. And I find that really annoying. I don't know if they've skipped a train or if he's just 2 minutes late and he's going to be there, so I have to walk out blind as if I didn't even have the app. The Federal Highway Administration is funding what they're calling Wave 1 of Smart Cities and Transportation, and they picked 3 finalist projects last year. One of those is in New York City, working with the Department of Transportation. It's in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and they're talking about putting modules into thousands of vehicles, not just city vehicles like garbage trucks and buses, but taxis, and even companies like UPS are on board. And these will, there's several advantages of having these in there, but one of them specifically is for people with disabilities and the elderly, because they are disproportionately often hit by vehicles. And it turns out it costs the large cities a lot of money because of vehicle-pedestrian collisions every year. So the problem here, and this ties into the app rant, they're going to have these smart vehicles, but the only way that the vehicle will know that you're in the intersection it needs to stop is if you're running an app on your smartphone. Well, what if you're not? So Qualcomm has got the Snapdragon processor that goes into a lot of the phones. They've jumped on board with this project, and they're putting microcode directly in the Snapdragon where it'll do near-field communications. What is it called? Short-range communications. The FCC has a special band for this. So the phone will inherently be able to announce itself to an oncoming vehicle without an app running inside. So that's one of the things that gets it right, because everybody's phone will be a collision avoidance system whether or not they know to put an app on it.
Yeah, I think when you think about the public infrastructure and urban planning particularly, is a connection of systems, and the interconnection of those systems. Smart technology like the ones you're talking about, in terms of short range, detectors and sensors play an important role. But let me kind of open this up. Also, I don't know if we have a roving microphone at all, but I'd love to sort of get the audience in on this conversation, which is, who owns our data, and who's accountable for that data? If smart cities are going to be accountable to people with disabilities and help provide services, can we, as people with disabilities, as older persons, own our own data? Or do we just have to submit to this concept of having our data sort of be given away for free? And a corollary to that, with a more technical question, is there a rule for kind of bit chain or like Bitcoin, that whole architecture of encrypted data that you can control that isn't controlled by any centralized service? Is that a role? Does that play a role in this smart cities issue as well? Does anybody want to tackle the data? Who owns our data question?
Well,
Sure.
I'll be glad to just give it a shot, and I don't think we've by any means addressed this. When I was in government, we started proposing this concept of a data locker, right? The
data locker, yeah.
You're the data is yours, right? And what we found, and it would be in different scenarios. Maybe you're a parent of school children, right? So you have all kinds of, FERPA laws and other things to worry about privacy. But what we found is as long as we would be good stewards of that data, that most owners of the data would be very willing to let you share it with some level of anonymity, to be able to support kind of the growth of these systems and the improvements of services. So, but then developing, what does that mean, right? What is this data locker? Where does it go? What are the encryption issues, et cetera, et cetera? I think it's an incredibly challenging area, but it also goes to one of the things that I think has challenged cities moving forward, is their own ability to handle this explosion of data that's coming their way.
Yeah.
And so if you look at, typical, small towns, big cities, states, developing, just like private sector companies have to, data expertise. How do I create a group that can really understand data, that can provide the data analytics that are necessary, that can partner with the right private sector companies and engage the right tools to be able to do this effectively? That's going on very actively in cities, in towns, in states, and countries around the world right now. But it takes some time to truly understand that, because you really need that ability or good partnerships with academia to be able to develop data strategies that can really survive this incredible change that's happening right now.
So data scientists with disabilities data engineers that understand the issues. It's not just about the data, but there's also this issue of the front end and the back end.
Right.
But you wanted to say something about the data too, did you, Malcom?
Yeah, I just briefly, I think Bill's right. He mentioned transparency earlier, and full disclosure, actually, my previous employer was Google, and Google, I think more than almost any company, is aware of the very fine line that one has to walk between providing services and being a good steward of that data. But one of the things that we began doing at Google, and we've since done at Uber as well, is releasing transparency reports. And I was at Google at the time of the Edward Snowden PRISM revelations, and I think one of the things that really bothered people, certainly about that situation, was that it was being done in secret. And so, to Bill's point, I think if we are transparent about the use cases for this data, what we're using it for, and how we're not going to use it, anonymity is important. I think people will feel a lot better about the ways in which we're using that data. And certainly, from Uber's perspective, your data is really important, but it's also useful in making sure that we provide you with a safe and affordable ride. So us being able to track the ride as it takes place, you being able to share your estimated time of arrival with anyone in your phone book at any point during the ride is a really important safety measure. But in our transparency report, we not only told you why we were using your data, but we also told you about every single request we got from every government to look at our data, and all of the times when we told them no, and if we had to tell them yes for some legal reason, why we did it. And I think that's gone over really well for us.
That's a good point. Do we have a roving microphone to engage the audience? We do. Yes. So at the back there, we have a microphone if anybody wants to raise their hand and get in on this great conversation. And smart cities, there we go. In the back, introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. Paul Schrader, American Foundation for the Blind. Good to hear this conversation. For the most part, you touched a little bit on investment. For the most part, infrastructure is poorly managed. Good Lord, living here in D.C., anyone riding the metro knows that full well. How do any of you, see the investment actually happening in the infrastructure that will provide data to get past this sort of disparate thing where we've got some apps that work with transit, we've got audible signals for those with vision loss, but they're not necessarily connected to anything. We've got points of interest, but not necessarily exposed in the way that can actually be used to orient and get around a city independently, and some of the other issues that you've talked about. What's going to drive the investment and actually make that happen in infrastructure, which is generally poorly invested in?
Anybody want to answer that here? Matt.
I'll take a stab at that. Paul, I think there's two things that will help with that. One of them is a shift from sort of infrastructure as being the locus of smart cities, like with some of the older road, highway type stuff, speed cameras and all that stuff, moving to data sensors that everyone already has with them, like smartphones that are running particular apps. So using that as your sensor, everyone already has it, so there's no cost of deployment and so on. And so a lot of data can be acquired and contributed by people in a crowdsourced way that will contribute to a sort of citywide data commons and solve some of the problems with maps, points of interest, that kind of stuff. Now, at the same time, I think there's that doesn't always work for real-time information because then you need people you need people whose job it is to contribute that data and monitor that data. The only really good example I can think of is Waze, where they're taking all this data from people who are in vehicles and then building a real-time traffic map with that. But that can't work for a lot of other things in cities. Doesn't work for public transit. So in that case, you do need people whose job it is to collect that data, like John's friend, when the bus driver who needs to actually turn that thing on. So he's contributing data that apps like ours and public signage like ours can use. At the same time, I think there is, I'd like to leave one area of hope, which is that one trend we're seeing in smart cities is that it's not just the government taking a role. So at TransitScreen, our real-time information signs about public transit We don't work with DC Metro currently because it's a very difficult organization to work with. What we do work with is 100 private real estate owners of buildings around DC. And so we can provide first-class information about all public transit, including Metro and Uber, in all of those buildings. And so what you're seeing is people who own property in the city and own real estate and have the ability to act very quickly and also act to advance the interests of everyone, taking the chance to make an investment in smart cities. And I think that's a very hopeful trend.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, Paul, to your question, I think there's good news and bad news around those kinds of government challenges that you mentioned. I think the good news is that, unfortunately, it's anecdotal, but lots of cities and lots of states are thinking differently about how to solve these problems now, right? As cities look at this incredible growth of their populations, as people move back into cities all around the world, they realize they need to figure these things out differently than they did before. And as I mentioned earlier, these organizations are very fragmented from an organizational perspective. Back in 2010, we created an office in the city of Boston called the Office of New Urban Mechanics. And the whole concept there was that we needed to think about these problems differently with a different lens and a different focus on the ways that we can solve these problems. And basically what that turned into is an open door. The city wasn't going to be able to solve all these problems themselves. As was just stated, we need partners. We need smart people. We need entrepreneurs. We need large companies. We need academia. We need all these other folks to help us solve these problems. So I think the good news is those kinds of organizations, those teams, are building in lots of the government organizations around. But there still exists, organizations that are very difficult to deal with. And we try to crack these things open from the data perspective. How do we start getting access to that data? Because the more access to the data we can get, the more doors we can open on potential solutions. But when you look at kind of the high-profile areas of transportation, these problems of increased populations in cities is not going to get solved the same way it used to be with more trains and different roads. We need new technology solutions, data solutions. It leads us to the whole concept of, connected cars and autonomous vehicles. And where is that going to lead us in terms of our ability to leave that car at home or not have that car anymore? It's a fascinating area for us. And when I look at it to try to solve some of the problems for people that are visually impaired or blind or have other disabilities, when you think of the investment that's going into the technologies around things like autonomous vehicles, the image recognition and collision avoidance and all those things, how can we connect the dots and take some of that investment and leverage it for folks today who are trying to navigate their daily life through a campus or across a street? So we think there's huge opportunity here, but it has to be thought about in a different way than it has historically.
Thank you. Let's do 2 questions from the audience. And then get back over here. Okay, you want to comment on that, Dan?
Oh, I was just going to say, and all of that is dependent upon the networks being able to handle faster speeds, and all of our operators are working there. Interesting, Bill, you talked about using beacon technology. One of our members, Chunghwa Telecom in Taiwan, is doing exactly that, using beacons and using an application for the blind so that you can come off public transportation, walk through a city, find shopping areas, find restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure exactly where they are with the rollout, but I'd be happy to connect you if you'd like to get information on that.
And the partnerships issue, people here are working in every sector of society. What are the kind of partnerships that we see forming out of this conference on integrating these issues in smart city? Because in a sense, there's a kind of a wild west of smart cities, right? Yeah. So where do we draw a balance, towards standards, regulations, coordinating activities while still maintaining innovation and kind of progress? Anybody? Are there any other questions that you're dying to ask? Let's get this gentleman a microphone over here and one in the back. Go ahead.
Yes, Kristen Wright, AT&T. My question is more so around, smart cities, obviously is arriving, what's happening in Boston is great. But again, you have all the complications when dealing with government, public investment and such. But something that's exploding right now, of course, is smart home, Internet of Things is alive and well. So I'm curious with this group, your thoughts on, how can the smart home or some of these technologies that are going to the homes be a jumping off point? Because essentially, Nest is probably the most pervasive and popular thing out there, which utilities are already using for energy management programs. So, and that's a purely consumer market as opposed to having to engage in public investment. So what are your thoughts on the intersection between smart home and smart cities, or just maybe a base to build to some of your goals?
Let's get one more question over here, and then we'll wrap it up in the next 5 minutes.
Hi, Tony Stevens with American Council of the Blind. I wanted to pitch the question around crowdsourcing solutions. Malcolm, what you were speaking about in infrastructure, I think is a very important thing for a lot of us in the advocacy world, where sometimes we can get very upset without sort of the larger picture in front of us. In a sense of like what Uber's doing in Chicago, I think there's a lot of opportunities where, my own personal view of paratransit is that something, even though it's required under ADA, is separate but equal. And I'm really encouraged by sort of the innovative solutions that you all are trying to find toward a problem. To all of you on the panel, what are some of the best ways you think that crowdsourcing for solutions could be done so that we can continue this sort of innovation that Malcolm was sort of talking about towards some real issues of sustainability and budgeting and things like that our cities are dealing with?
Great. So 1 minute for each panelist. Crowdsourcing innovation, Internet of Things, 2 areas we haven't talked about, and any ideas that you'd encourage us all to take back in the work that we do. Let's go with Matthew and work this way.
Sure. I think one of the technologies that has the biggest potential to be disruptive in this whole area, especially for blind and visually impaired people, is beacons. And we've talked about this a number of times, but we really need to get together in terms of standardization of all of these beacons that are being deployed all over cities, because the real promise is once you have beacons in physical locations, that ties physical locations to your mobile device or physical screens to a mobile device in an incredibly powerful way. So there's a new technology from Google called the physical web, which basically lets any public sign or like a transit screen or even a static information sign have a web page associated with that. And so once those are accessible on mobile devices, then that makes that bridge from physical to mobile to screen reader or other accessibility technology just seamless. And so we really need to look at the future of some of these technologies and really encourage the physical web and encourage the people who control the operating systems, namely Google and Apple, to really facilitate the development of this and the visual accessibility of this technology. Because I think there are only a few technologies that I've seen that really have a tremendous amount of momentum and future potential to make smart cities real for people with disabilities. And I think this is one of them. So if you're here from Google or Apple accessibility, please come talk to me. Love to tell you more about this.
Thanks.
I see a lot of opportunities for startups out here. I wasn't originally from Silicon Valley, and until I moved there, it didn't occur to me that, hey, I had some ideas and I could start a company. So any of you out there that have some interesting ideas, maybe you should become the next Uber. And by the way, I think the earlier panel did this. I'll give a plug. We're also looking for people with disabilities to work at Cisco.
Great.
And finally, Cisco is real big on what we call digitization, or becoming a digital company, which means looking at the networking technologies and saying, well, they've evolved to this level. Maybe I can do business differently, or maybe I can do something that had never been done before. We've actually got a couple digital partnerships with countries as well, France and India. And we haven't had much luck in getting a top-level digital plan for the United States. I'd love to see something in that area.
Great.
Very briefly, I think I'm probably most qualified to talk about crowdsourcing. I think at a core level, what crowdsourcing really is connecting people's knowledge with other people who they otherwise don't know. So it's someone knows something, and how can you share that knowledge broadly with the rest of the world? And this actually reminds me a little bit of the genesis behind Uber Pool, which is basically people want to go in the same direction, but it's a stranger, so you don't necessarily know who wants to go where and when. And so we looked at our data over a long period of time in San Francisco, and we realized a ton of trips are actually going in the same direction, and they're going in the same direction at the same time. So what if we could use our network to combine information that one person knows with information that someone else doesn't know? That's the sort of fundamental nature of the platform. I think about the fact that if you own a car, your car is sitting idle for 96% of the time that you have it. Wow. So instead of it being kind of wasted while it's just sort of lounging around, what if you could use it to make extra money? What if you could just sort of drive forth efficiencies around knowledge and things to make people able to move around a city better? And I think that's the kind of way we can leverage crowdsourcing to make our platforms grow.
Just 30 seconds for each 2 or 3 words.
I'll try to do 30 seconds very quickly. At the GSMA, we have a Smart Cities task force we just launched, made up of about 40 or 50 of our operators. Interestingly enough, AT&T is chairing the Smart Cities task force. And the first topic that we're tackling is crowdsourcing.
Great.
Looking at what kind of data can we collect, what do we do with that data, privacy issues, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very current issue with us right now.
So crowdsourcing and Internet of Things in 30 seconds. So we, as we're developing our app at Perkins School for the Blind, it is about crowdsourcing. It is how can we use the community to help folks that are visually impaired or blind navigate more effectively. How that goes to Internet of Things is let's put some of those beacons out there, because you should be able to, with precision, be able to find that bus stop, or to be able to find your Starbucks, or back home at your Dunkin' Donuts. Or if you come out of a Boston Red Sox game and you're at Kenmore Square and you're waiting for your Uber, well, maybe it would be great for me to know which one is my Uber through an app that's going to be able to connect those beacons. So I think there's so many things that we can do that leverage those technologies and grow to bigger crowdsourcing. And the one last thing is, so many of these things happen in individual areas, individual organizations. We have to find a way to network better together so we can create critical mass and we can get the funding and the attention that we really need to amplify this for everybody.
I think the way we can summarize all these issues is really echoing what Jenny from Microsoft said this morning, which is that we're moving beyond, and also Peter Korn said this, moving beyond an idea that disability just lies within an individual, but rather it's a dynamic experience of an individual in a particular environment. So if there are capabilities that aren't being realized because of bad design, because of the way our cities fail to give us information and knowledge that we can act upon, we're limiting the potential that we each have to actually exercise our dreams and our goals. And so when we think about smart cities, it's about eliminating these factors that limit our potential. And we can think about an opportunity to get smart people working on a set of solutions that can scale up. Then we'll be able to really reimagine the landscape of what our cities are and what they can be. Thank you all for a great discussion today.
Victor and panel, thank you. That was really fascinating. As somebody who works in technology, I found that really interesting. The area I'd also maybe remind you to keep in mind is spectrum. It's always a difficulty because maybe new devices start trip over more traditional devices like alternative listening devices or assistive listening devices.